Okay, then. So we begin in Mirza Hashem, the 8th parak of Sanhedrin, Daf Samach Ches Omid Beis, the parak Ben Sorer Umore. And the Mishnah addresses the question of May Emosai Nase Ben Sorer Umore. So we're talking about the age for a Ben Sorer Umore. Is he a katan? Is he a gadol? Is there a period of time of godless where he's still not a full-fledged gadol? And basically, we're going to see as we go along that a young boy, in terms of his status in halacha, is divided up into 3 different time periods. And that is a mirror image of a young girl. A young girl has 3 different time periods. She's a ketana up to the age of 12. She's a nara between the ages of 12 and 12 and a half. And she's a gedola or a bogeres after the age of 12 and a half. And now, and this is a real radical chiddush, we have a mirror image, 3 periods in the boy's life, which correspond to the 3 periods of the girl's life. So we usually assume that a boy fits into one of 2 periods of time. He has the status of either a katan or a gadol. And now we're going to carve out a period of time, which is kind of parallel to a nara, who's neither a ketana nor a bogeres. She's right in the middle. In the case of a katan, he's already a gadol, but he's not a full-fledged gadol. He's a gadol up to a certain point in a very limited slice of time, a window of time in his life. And that period of time is only relevant to one halacha, and that's Ben Sorer Umore. It has no parallel outside of the bounds of Ben Sorer Umore. So that's going to be this concept called Me Emosai Nase Ben Sorer Umore. We'll see that the Mishnah invokes a Yalfusa to derive that a katan is not part of Ben Sorer Umore. And then we're going to have a halacha that if he's a full-fledged gadol, he's not part of Ben Sorer Umore. He's got to be right there in the middle. It's a very narrow window of time, of age in the life of a young boy when he is a candidate for becoming a Ben Sorer Umore. Vishayavi shtei saros, he's no longer a katan. He has shtei saros, the simoni of godless, but the ad sheyakif zokan, he's not yet a full-fledged, mature young man. He's a gadol, but he's a gadol of shtei saros ad sheyakif hazokan. Rashi says ad sheyakif zokan, shei zokan mukaf seyar saviv kulo. So when he has a full bush of genital hairs, then already he's too old, too mature to be a candidate as a Ben Sorer Umore. He has shtei saros, he has the barest minimum, but he doesn't have, the fully developed genital hairs of Yakif Hazokan. He writes here in the Mesifta, Sheyakiv Zokan ad Makom ha'erva yemukov ad shemakom ha'erva yemukov kulo b'seir. Okay? The genital area is completely covered by seir. Now the word zakan usually refers to the beard, to the facial hairs. So now the Mishnah goes out of its way to point out that the word zakon here has no connection with his beard, his facial hairs, and it interprets and qualifies the word zakon as tachton. So yeah, the word zakon is either the zakon elyon or the zakon tachton. We're talking about the zakon tachton, which is the makom erva. But lo ha'elyon, not his facial beard. El shedibru chacham v'loshen nikir. The Mishnah explains why use this ambiguous phrase Hachiyakif HaZakon, which sounds like his beard hairs, but it's using a Lashon Nikir. Now, the commentaries understood that there's no source in the Torah for this sealing, this maximum period of time, age, which is called Yakif HaZakon, but rather it was a Kabbalah shekiblu me'avosenu. It was somehow a tradition that was passed through the generations, that the limit, the ceiling, that the oldest age for being a candidate as a Ben Soromor is Achiyakif HaZakon HaTachton. That was a Kabbalah Mi'avos. That's Torah Shebal Peh. Now the Mefarshim here, the basic Rishonim on the Daf, will try to explain why Ben Soromor was placed here at this juncture, the 8th parak of Sanhedrin. And they point out that in the earlier parak here, in the Mishnah, before our Mishnah, on Daf Nun Gimel, the Mishnah already gives us a list of Chayvei Skila, Haniskolim. So that's the previous chapter here. Later on, we'll have a parak of Misrafim and Echnokim, because there are 4 Mises Pesim. So now we're in the thick of the Chiyuvei Skila, the Niskolim. And that's where Ben Soromor fits in. Because Ben Soromor, the Torah says, requires Skila. Now, in the Mesifka, at the very beginning of this volume, he, one second. Okay, I'm not finding it right now. But he quotes the psukim. You know what? I think we'll take a little break and open up a chumash. I think it's kedai. So we're going to open up to Parshas Ki Tetzei in Dvarim Perikov Aleph. Let me just get this open here. So the Torah opens up Parshas Ki Tetzei with the story of the Eishes Yifas Toar, when you go out to battle. And then it goes on to discuss the Isur of Lo Yakir, that the Bechar, firstborn, will get a double portion. And then beginning with Pasuk Yud Ches, which is the 18th verse in chapter Chaf Aleph in Kitetse, the Torah says, "Ki yel leish ben sorer umoreh einenu shomea b'kol aviv v'kol imo, v'yisruo so v'lo yishma lehem, v'safsubo aviv v'imo, v'otziru so el ziknei iro vel shar makomo, v'amro el ziknei iro b'neinu zeh sorer umoreh einenu shomea b'kolenu, zolel v'sovei, Urigamu kol anshe iro ba'avonim v'meisu bi'arta rami kebech v'chol yisrael yishmu v'iro." So how many psukim do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 psukim. Correct? Let me go over that one more. Yud Ches, Yud Tes is 2. Chaf is 3, and Chaf Aleph is 4. 4 psukim, an entire parsha, and a parak, the 8th parak in Sanhedrin, dedicated to these 4 psukim of Ben Sorer Umoreh. But the last of the psukim indicates his punishment, and he's put to death by stoning. Urigamu kol anshe iru ba'avonim v'meis. That's called skilo. And in the previous chapter in Sanhedrin, we have a chapter that's dedicated to the laws of Niskolim and how to do skila. And therefore, Ben Sorer Umoreh, where the Torah says explicitly chayav skila, is incorporated into this part of Masechet Sanhedrin. So we'll keep the Chumash open as we go through the Mishnah. So Ben Sorer Umoreh me emas haynasim Ben Sorer Umoreh mishiyovish saras achiyakif and zokon, and we're talking about zokon hatachton v'lo elyon el shedibru chacham lo shemikir shenema. Okay. Now, the word shenemar here has a number of different meanings. Right? Shenemar means as it says in the Torah, but what are you proving from the Torah? Number one, we're going to prove the opening word in this Mishnah, which qualifies and restricts Ben Sorer Umoreh to a male, and that's called Ben. Number two, we're going to derive from a pasuk that we're talking about a Ben who's young, as opposed to a fully mature male who has Yakif Hazokon, and we're also proving that he's got to be a Gadol, which means Bishiyovish Shtei Saras. He has to have 2 pubic hairs. So let's go through the 3 shenemars. So the first shenemar is Ki yel leish ben, and the Mishnah says ben v'lo bas. A girl cannot become a bas Sorer Umoreh, no matter what the feminists say. You can be as progressive as you want, but there's no parsha Ben Sorer Umoreh for a bas. Period. You know, you can imagine the ladies at the kotel will object. Why isn't there such a thing as a bas Sorer Umoreh? You know, we want to put to death a girl who's a bas Sorer Umoreh. So we have equality between the genders, right? No, there's no such thing. The Mishnah says it's got to be a ben v'lo bas, and that's why the Torah says ki yel leish ben. Next, ben v'lo ish. Ben indicates a young man. We'll see in a minute that we have a third Josh. He's not too young, but he's not too old. V'lo ish. What does the word ish mean in the context of this Mishnah? Rav Yehuda Nasi used the word ish to convey someone who's Yaakif Hazakon Hatachton, which means the entire erva is covered on all sides by genital hairs. He's already an ish. He's already too old to be a ben. So ben has a double meaning here. Number one, ben is excluding a bas. And number two, ben indicates he's young and he's not fully matured. He doesn't have a full I don't know what word to use, of genital hair. It's a full set of genital hair. Now, we're going to say that Ben indicates that he already has shtei saros. He's not a katan. But why? I mean, Ben, the word Ben could lend itself to be interpreted even as a katan. So the Mishnah now is very hard pressed because the condition for Ben Soromora is that he already has shtei saros. He's not a katan anymore. But where's the shenema? Where do you see that in the parsha? How do you know that this parsha excludes a katan? And surprisingly, all the Mishnah could come up with to justify that a katan is excluded from Ben Soromora is that he's poter shelo ba lichlal mitzvahs. We can't hold him guilty of violating the Torah because he's not a bar mitzvah. He's poter min ha-mitzvahs. Now we want to notice two things here. Number one, there is no pasuk. There's no biblical basis for excluding a katan. Rather, it's based on the general universal halacha that a katan is poter min ha-mitzvahs. But point number two, which is even more fascinating, is that there was a havamina before the Mishnah spelled it out and excluded it, that a katan could be included as a ben soromora. And this Rabbosa, we're only going to really understand the havamina that a katan could be put to death as a ben soromora when we get to the Gemara Daf Ayin Aleph later on in the parak, that a ben soror is nidon al shem sofa, that even though he's guilty, as we'll soon see, he steals from his father in order to supply his addiction of meat and wine. Today we would speak about cocaine. You know, he's desperate to have his intake of drugs, so he steals, and he's guilty of gneva and gzela, but nevertheless that wouldn't justify skila. So the Gemara is going to come up with a principle called nidon al shem sofa, that the Torah somehow predicts, the divine knowledge of God predicts where this child is going. And ultimately, he's going to become a murderer, which is true, by the way, because people are addicted. They eventually, many of them, in order to supply their addiction, will murder you and take your money to buy the drugs. And that al shem sofo means that now he's not worthy of death. He doesn't deserve death. He may have violated gzela, but he's not worthy of being put to death. And therefore, a child, if we predict that he's on the road, on the path to becoming a murderer, and he's already addicted, technically he's a katan, and he doesn't have shtei saros, but nevertheless, I could already predict, I would have a havamina that he should be put to death as a ben soromor. And the Mishnah comes lafuke to exclude that havamina and establish that he must have shtei saros because a katan is poter min ha-mitzvahs. In other words, although the level of guilt of criminal violations of the Torah law is lower, it's on a lower flame than a capital crime. He's not guilty of a capital crime. A ganon or a gazan is not put to death, but nevertheless, he is guilty of a crime. And that can only be applicable if he's already got shtei saros, he's already a gadol, because a katan is poter min ha-mitzvahs. So again, the nidon al shem sofa, which means that we will put him to death and condemn him to a capital death penalty, is premature. It's anticipatory, but nevertheless, he does achieve some basic level of criminal act. He is guilty, albeit of a lower edge crime, but a crime nevertheless, and that can only apply if he's a gadol and he has shtei saros, because a katan is poter min ha-mitzvahs. But just to summarize, we have two halachas restrictions in Ben Tzara Mora that are derived from the pasuk of Ben. Number one, to exclude a bas. Number two, to exclude a gadol who's already mature. He's an ish, and he has Yaakov Hazokan Atachton. And then we have a third halach established in this mission in terms of the time window of a candidate Ben Tzara Morer for the death penalty. And that third halach is derived from a universal svara rather than from the pasuk in Ben Tzara Morer in the Parsha in Kipetze, and that is that a Qatar who has no shtei saras is not a candidate, and he will not be put to death as a Ben Tzara Morer. And the reason for that is he cannot be considered a criminal who is guilty of a violation of Torah law because he's part of an mitzvah. That, my friends, is the summary of the Mishnah. Now, suffice it to say that this concept of Nidon al Shem Sofo, which again is going to be the Sugya on Daf Ayin Aleph, is a very mind-boggling concept. And frankly speaking, that's one of the reasons I wanted to learn this parak. It's a little bit off the beaten track, if you know what I mean. It's not what you call classic. You know, if we're learning the laws of our Psachim, and in another shir I'm going to be giving weekly, we're going to be learning about Eidim Zomimim, at least that's, you know, that fits into the general structure of halacha, but Ben Tzara Morer is like something that completely undermines the entire system that we deal with. You know, our legal system of halacha, of Torah, is based on the fact that a person is found guilty of a crime and will be punished with the appropriate punishment. That's not Ben Tzara Morer. He's guilty of a crime, but a very low ebb crime in the hierarchy of criminal activities, and it's certainly not something that would warrant a death penalty. I will add another radical element in this parsha of Ben Tzara Morer, and that is skila. Because even if you'll tell me Nidon al Shem Sofo, and the Torah somehow predicts in divine wisdom that this man is on his way to becoming a murderer is not put to death by skila. You know, we have four different forms or types of capital punishment. Arba Mises Bezin. We mentioned them recently on Yom Kippur. And the most intense and severe of all four is called skila. It's not very pleasant. You know, none of the misos are very pleasant. But in the case of skila, it's considered the most chomer of all the four. A rotzeach, a murderer, is put to death by sayif. Before he knows it, he's dead. He probably didn't even realize that he was dead. Because by the time he realized that he was already dead. You know. But anyway, be that as it may, sayif, which is the punishment for rotzeach, is lower ebb vis-a-vis relative to skila, which is on the top. So you're telling me, Nidon al Shem Sofo, this young man is eventually going to be a murderer because he's addicted. And therefore, we're going to put him to death by skila? A murderer himself, who did it before, is not put to death by skila. Where does skila come in? So again, that's another element of what I call the fluke of Ben Tzara Morer. And the greatest fluke of Ben Tzara Morer, which again we'll get to later on in the parak, is lo hoya v'lo nivra. There was never a reality of Ben Tzara Morer. Or is that really true? Yerushalmi seems to indicate in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that he himself sat on the kever, on the on the burial place of a Ben Sorah Mor. But again, that's, shall we say, classified information. You didn't hear that, just forget it. The Gemara Bavli says lo hoya v'lo niv. So imagine we're learning a sugya, a parsha that's 4 psukim in the Torah that never will come to fruition. I mean, if that doesn't make it the greatest fluke in the world, can you show me another parsha in the Torah where Chazal will tell us it never was and never will be? And to the best of my knowledge, Ben Sorah Mora is very unique in that sense. And why would the Torah bother? We have a whole parak in Torah Sheba'al Peh with something that's lo hoya v'lo niv. Chazal say el drosh v'kabel schar, just a darshan. So again, this is like off the beat. You know what I mean? We're learning something that's off the beaten path. Now, remind me, because I may make mistakes here. Do you have the Oter Hayunim? I know, John, you have it in the back. Does everybody else have it? I forget whether you got a copy of Sanhedrin or you didn't. Yes, you have it?
Yeah, I sent it out.
Okay, great. So, John, you'll have the original. And Stephen, Don, you'll have a photocopy of it, correct? But Steve, you don't have the actual Gemara yet, do you?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I do have Sanhedrin.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to, get over jet lag still. Good. So that's good news.
Yeah, the only thing I didn't have was the Mudehod that I'll pick up from tonight.
On something. But on Sanhedrin was set, because you have the Oter Yud.
Right, I got the Hare Kedem for Pesachim as well.
Good. All right. So I'll get you the Amudei Hodim Mitzvah tonight. I already put it in my briefcase so I won't forget it. And you have the Oter Yud. Now this first Maracha, which is called Lamentes, right? So the page number is Aleph on the top left, but it's called Maracha Lamentes, correct? Ben Sorah Mor. So this first Maracha, you'll see, is, I don't know how many pages. I think it's about 11 pages long. And I really want to do a thorough job on this. So, you might want to print out these pages and make notes on them and so forth, because, or if you have the Gemara, make notes in your Gemara, because again, I could change my mind tomorrow, in a minute. But if you ask me Basher Usham, in my mindset now, we're going to probably spend hours upon hours on this Oter unit. And in the beginning, he quotes the 4 psukim that we read before in the first paragraph. And then he goes on to tell us what kind of criminal act is the Ben Sorah Mor guilty of. Number 1, he has to eat a certain volume of meat, which is called tartimar basar. We'll have to figure out how many liters of meat that is, volume. Yishteh chatzi lug yaini talki, Italian wine. I guess it's the finest wine that's very addictive. And he drank at least a chatzi lug, which is not an awful amount of wine. And there's a 2-stage process. First of all, having been found guilty with witnesses that testify in court that he was guilty of stealing that amount of meat and that amount of wine and drinking the meat, eating the meat and drinking the wine, then we have stage number 1. Stage number 1 is Malchus. Now, Malchus means 39 lashes in front of the basic minimum bezdin, a court that's made up of 3 judges. All this is in the earlier chapters in Sanhedrin. So Ben Sorah Mor at first stage was given 39 lashes. That's enough of a warning for him to realize that he's getting himself into real hot water. Then he again continues in his same way and steals and eats. Then he's brought to the court, and now we have a court of 23 judges by his parents, his mother and his father. And after the testimony is checked out, Beis Din will put him to death as a ben soromor with skewer. Now, I'm not sure, but I think even in the first round, he was brought by his parents. I don't know, that I have to check out. We didn't get to that sugya yet. But in any event, we have the overview of Seder ben soromor, in which he was guilty of X and Y, Tartima Basar, Chatzi Lugyayin, was brought to Beis Din, they gave Malchus, and then they brought him back a second time because he continued repeatedly in the same fashion. And now he's brought by his parents to Beis Din, and after the evidence is adduced, he's put to death by skila. They push him off a high ledge, and then they throw boulders on his body, the whole messy skew. But now we need a judgment of 23 judges, which is called the Sanhedrin. Because Dini Nefashos, for capital crimes, we need a full-fledged court of 23 judges. Okay, now we have a sugya Rabbi Yehuda. Because until Rabbi Yehuda steps up to the plate, I would tell you that it's gan shayach, it's very possible, plausible to have a ben soromor who's put to death. But Rabbi Yehuda throws a curveball here, which makes it almost virtually impossible to have a ben soromor. And Rabbi Yehuda is quoted on Daf Ayin Aleph, and he says that if we go back to the pasuk says, the Amru el Zikne Iro, B'nenu Zeh Soromor, Einenu Shomer B'kolenu. B'kolenu. In our voice. What does that mean, our voice? It's as if there's one call of both his father and his mother. And we have, by divine miracle, we have Shomer V'Zocher B'Dibur Echad, but in human beings, he has a call, his father and his wife, the mother has a call. But the Torah says B'Kolenu, and Rabbi Yehuda Darshan said that means one call. What does that mean, one call of the father and the mother? Says Rabbi Yehuda, She'aviv v'imo tzrichim lios shavin. They have to be equal. They have to have one call. Now, we're going to soon see the Bach, who lived approximately 5 centuries ago. His name was Rabbi Yoel Sorkis. He writes that this is impossible, that the father and mother should be shoving b'kol. Not impossible physically, and especially in contemporary life, when men want to be women, women want to be men. You could have a woman who has a male voice, maybe that's going to become popular. I don't know. But al pi din in halach, it's impossible. What does that mean? It's impossible because we have a concept called an islandess in halach. An islandess is a woman whose reproductive system does not kick in. It could never fully develop. She could never have a child. And one of the simonim of an islandess, there are many, is if she has a male voice. Now, on the male side of the equation, there's something called a saris. A saris is a man that's impotent. It's impossible for him to reproduce. He cannot become a father of a child. And one of the siman of a saris is a male that has a female voice. So a ben soromor could not possibly exist if the kol aviv is kol imo hashavin. because we want to. If they both have a female voice, then he's a saris and he can't produce a child. If they both have a male voice, then she's an islandess and she can't produce a child. And therefore, the Gemara is going to conclude, based on Rabbi Yehuda's shita, that we need bikolenu, that there's shavim bikol, that ben sor mar lo hayv lo nivra, v'lo asid lios. It would never happen, because it's impossible to have kol echad and there's shavim bikol, and yet they had a child. They could not produce a child. So you never have a ben sor mar if the kolenu was shavim. And therefore, the Gemara establishes, based on Rabbi Yehuda, that ben sor mar lo hayv v'lo asid lios. However, the Gemara is going to quote a brisa, which is also Yushalmi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, or some have it in the gears of Rabbi Yonasan. Anira Isiv, I saw Ben Sora Morer, and he was put to death. The Ashavti al Kivra, and I sat on his tombstone, if you will. Now, in the footnote here on the bottom of the Masechet, there's a whole discussion: are you allowed to sit on top of a matzeva? That's a zilzul in kavod hametz. And from the fact that Rabbi Yochanan sat on the kever of a ben sor morer, poskim want to come to the conclusion that you're permitted to sit on a matzeva. Like, for example, my parents are buried in Har Menuchos, and it's one matzeva next to the other. There's a very, the real estate is very high over there. So, there's a very little strip of, you could barely stand between, I forgot the name of the guy who's my father's shocking there. But between one kever and another, there's hardly room to stand. And it's a hot day. You're saying a mole, it's the yard site for your father, whatever it might be. You came to visit your parents' kvar, and you want to sit down on the matzeva. So some want to say that from the fact that Rabbi Yochanan sat down on the matzeva of a ben sor morer, you see that you're allowed to sit down on the matzeva. But they reject this. No, you're not allowed to sit down on the matzeva. Rabbi Yochanan only did it to be mezalzel in a ben sor morer. He's a rasha, and therefore you're allowed to sit down on his matzeva to demonstrate that he's not in the fold, so to speak. And this is a pella to me, by the way. I don't begin to understand this, because once a person is put to death for his crime, then that's a kapara, misa mechaperes. Like the Gemara says, with regard to Malchus, at the beginning of Masechet Sanhedrin, it says, "V'nikla achicha leinecha." Why does it say achicha? You're giving him Malchus, and the Torah calls him achicha. And the Gemara says that once he gets Malchus, he's called achicha. He's back into the fold, because the Malchus bring kapara for him. And l'chora, in the case of ben sor morer, no less than any misa, he will achieve kapara with the misa. So why are you being mezalzel by sitting on his kever? I don't know. That to me defies my understanding. But be that as it may, the Gemara in this brisa testifies that there was a ben sor morer. She'ira b'mitzius shaya ben sor morer v'nera. And believe it or not, the only one who addresses this question, to the best of our knowledge, is Rabbeinu Bachai, who wrote a commentary on the Torah. And he says that Rabbi Yochanan, or Rabbi Yonasan, depending on the Girsa, Cholek ala Braisa Shevia Gmar Shelo Hoiv Lo Nivra, he disagrees. Again, according to the Bach, I don't know where there's room to disagree if it's a Simon Islandess or a Simon Saris, the fact that they both have the same code. Unless what Rabbeinu Bachai is implying is that apparently there were certain Tanoim who never accepted the drush of Bikolenu. Bikolenu means we had one voice, not in the physical sense that she had a male voice or he had a female voice, but we spoke the same voice. We, sometimes parents, I don't have to tell you this, they speak from two different voices. I don't mean physically. I mean, a father has his thing and his mother has her thing. And usually it's the father who's stricter than the mother, but it could go either way. mother might put her foot down here, and the father would look the other way. The other way around is also. The father says, this I can't tolerate, and the mother says, no, it's okay. So the child gets what's called mixed messages. In such a case, he's not a ben Sorah Mor. You can't hold him guilty as a ben Sorah Mor if he was raised with mixed voices. I mean, his confusion he's not guilty of his confusion. But if they both have one voice, I don't mean physically, but they speak out of the same concerns, with the same, what we call Weltanschauung, with the same hierarchy of values, then he's rotten to the core. He had the best upbringing and education that you could expect when his parents spoke the same voice. And very often in religious issues, where to send the children to yeshiva. Again, I don't know if, gentlemen, you ever had this experience, but in very religious circles, and especially if a man marries a Baal Tshuva, a Baal Tshuva, or the other way around, he's a Baal Tshuva, very often these issues are very, very severe in marriage. He or she wants to send the child to the most religious school, and the spouse says, no, I want a balanced education, with secular knowledge, and prepare them for law school and medical school and so forth and so on. You follow what I mean? Are you following me at all? That when the parents speak in two voices, and there's a struggle, it really damages marital harmony, and the child is going to be impacted by that. And maybe that's an excuse why he was raised with two heads. The Gemara has in Masechet Bechoros the case of a firstborn child that was born with two heads. And the Gemara originally thought that this was a joke. There's no such thing. And the Gemara says that they brought in a child with two heads. What are they called? Siamese twins, right? And the Gemara wants to know, does he have to spend 5 slime for Pidyon Bechor or 10 slime? Do we double the price? Because they're two beings here, sharing the same body. But in any event, we see that there's one opinion in the Gemara that ben Sorah Mor was a reality and was put to death. We're suggesting that Shita did not accept Rabbi Yehuda's drasha of Kolenu, Shushavim B'Kol, and therefore there is such an entity called ben Sorah Mor. Then Rabbeinu Bachai comes up with a whole new twist on the story of Rabbi Yochanan that's recorded that he sat on the kever of a ben Sorah Mor. No. Lo haisal ben Sorah Mor go. This is not a real, genuine ben Sorah Mor. He was like a ben Sorah Mor. He was a rebellious child in the generic sense. And who would be your paradigm of someone who's like a ben Sorah Mor, who rebels against his parents? That's Avshalom, who rebelled against his very father and declared himself as the king of Israel against David HaMelech, his father. So when he says, Rabbi Yochanan says, he declares, I sat on the kever of ben Sorah Mor, he means someone like an Avshalom. He was Me'ain ben Sorah Mor. Even Rabbi Yochanan would agree, says Rabbeinu Bachai, ben Sorah Mor. There was never a real full-fledged ben Sorah Mor that was put to death under the law of ben Sorah Mor. There was someone like a ben Sorah Mor, like a rebellious son like Avshalom, who rebelled against his father for the kingship, like a Shakespearean tragedy, but a real technical, halachic, legal ben Sorah Mor never existed, even according to Rabbi Yonas. And that's where Rabbeinu Bachai vacillates back and forth. He's not sure one way or the other. Now, in the next section here, in what we call Marachal Amites, the first presentation here in the Otzar Yunim, we invoke the Gemara on Daf Ayin Beis of Rabbi Yossi Aglili that a ben Sorah Mor is nidon al shem sofa. that the Torah anticipated that down the line, who molaste mesabrios, when he doesn't have enough money to fill up his addiction of meat and wine, he's going to go and he's going to be molaste. Molaste means not just a regular gazlan, it means a rond, what word am I looking for? Robbery, a rond robber who will kill for the sake of robbery. That's called Nidon al Shem Sof. That's the Gemara of Yossi Aglili on Daf Ayin Beis. So now we have the Ramban. The Ramban insists that even though Nidon al Shem Sofo, he is guilty of certain averos, not of killing, of murder. That's Nidon al Shem Sofo. But don't think that he's not a criminal. He is a criminal. And the Ramban offers three answers to the question, what is the nature of his criminal act? Okay, he's eating meat, and he's drinking wine. He's involved in the pleasures of life. He drinks the best, finest wine. But that's not a criminal act. So what avera did he violate? And the Ramban comes up with three answers. And this you'll see on the left column in the paragraph, Ve'ha'averos sha'ovet. You have that? On the left column of the first page. Number one, Hu mekale oviv v'imo umamra bohem she'eno shomea l'divreya. And somehow he brings a curse upon his parents by rebelling against them. I don't know if the Ramban means this literally, but the Torah does say that a Makalel who curses his parents, Chas v'shalom, is put to death. That's a capital crime. The second Avera he has here is Kedoshim Tiyu. This is a famous sheet of the Ramban that when the Torah says we have to be holy, it means we shouldn't be gluttonous and we shouldn't drink too much wine. And this Ben Sora Morer, who's already a gadol, he has two Cyrus, he is guilty of violating Kedoshim Tiyu. It's like a lav habamachal esa. And finally, he comes up with another violation of the Oso Salvodu. And he, with the capital H, you will worship. And the Ramban Shita is that the Oso Salvodu means that every action that he does is for the sake of Shaman. But this person, this Ben Solomora, who's interested in his own lusts and his own pleasures, he violates the Oso Salvodu. Okay, now we get to the main question. Nidon al Shem Sofo. His Sofo, the last name is Abrius will be a Rotzech, but why is he Chayav Skila? So in the paragraph in Tirtzu Rishonim, which is the last paragraph on the first page, he says that he will murder someone on Shabbos. It doesn't, if he's already a murderer, then it won't make any difference that he's so desperate for money because of his addiction. He'll murder someone on Shabbos. Now on Shabbos, we have 39 malachas. Which one of the 39 malachas does he violate when he kills somebody and murders someone on Shabbos? Well, what do you, I see Steve, you're shaking your head. I don't know what that means.
Not necessarily any of them.
Oh, so these Rishonim say he violates one of the 39. That's called Netilas Neshama, which is listed in the 39 in Periklal God.
Which is that?
Netilas Neshama. It's like when you shecht an animal on Shabbos. So for killing a live being, you violate one of the 39 malachas. And in this case, if he murders someone on Shabbos because of his addiction, then he's chayav skila, because on Shabbos, you're chayav skila. In fact, whenever somebody says the word skila to me, immediately I think of Shabbos. I mean, there are many other cases of crimes that generate a chayav skila, but the classic is always Shabbos. That's what we think of. Now, this is a very big problem because there are 7 days of the week. What are the statistical probabilities that when this Ben Soru Mor becomes a molasthemes abrios, that he's going to murder someone on Shabbos? It would seem to me, tell me if you disagree, that the chances are 1/7. Can somebody tell me what percentage that is? Like 15%? I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Oh, I just guessed. But, all right, so it's about 15%. So you're going to put him to death al shem sofo because you are going to anticipate that he's going to be a murderer on Shabbos and violate Shabbos, and therefore we're going to give him skila when it's a 15% chance that indeed he'll violate the Shabbos by murdering someone on Shabbos. So the Mefarshim sort of, what is it called when you're desperate to come up with an answer? You tread water or you backtread. And they say, well, he's going to murder constantly. He's got a lifelong addiction. He'll never have enough money in his bank account to buy the meat and the wine that he needs for his addiction. Ultimately, he's definitely going to kill on Shabbos. I'm not sure I can buy into that. So he quotes now one of the Chachmei Sfarad, one of the Rishonim of the Yad Ramah. This is in the last 4 or 5 lines on the page, in the text itself, I mean. And the Yad Ramah says, Mishad Chil Shabbos Levad Lo Yinu Harbino Sal Shem Sofo. To say that we're going to kill him with skila based on the fact that he's going to murder on Shabbos, that doesn't justify skila. Rak mishum shesofo l'rtzoach yehei gam rodef. So the issue is not whether we put him to death, but how we put him to death. Why is there no issue that we put him to death? And the Yad Ramah comes up with a curveball, and he says he's a rodef. Why the Rishonim focused on Ritzicha? The Gemara says, "Sofa b'lasthemes abrios," he'll be a rotzeach. Who knows what averis he'll violate? Why do you single out Ritzicha? And the answer is because Ritzicha is what justifies that we kill the Ben Soru Mor. Because even though I told you before that there's no other case in the Torah of lo hoya v'lo nivra, but there is another category of a criminal who's nidon al shem sofo, who will be punished based on what we anticipate down the line, and that's called a rodef. So Reuven is holding a hatchet and he's about to kill Shimon. We will kill Reuven before he gets to kill Shimon. Why? He didn't murder anybody. The answer is he's a rodef, and the Torah says we put a rodef to death. So that justifies why a Ben Soru Mor is going to be put to death. He's already a quasi rodef. He's not a rodef. I was thinking out loud, don't quote me on this, that if, let's say, I would come into, break into a terrorist cell and they're all planning a terrorist act, would I be able to put them to death because they're a rodef? A person plans to murder someone. I don't know if you ever had the experience where you plan to murder someone. Okay, I know someone, I don't want to talk about myself, but maybe you'll get the reference, that was planning to murder his principal in high school. Anyway, so you're not going to kill a person as a rodef just because he's planning to kill. A rodef means he's actually in the process of murdering someone. So Ben Tzora Mor is not a rodef. He's not in the process of murdering someone. But the Torah says, Nidan al Shem Sofo, we know that eventually he will be a rodef. The Torah was Machadesh in the divine wisdom. He will be a rodef. We'll kill him as a rodef, even though he's not yet a rodef technically. But now you ask yourself another question. Well, which kind of a death should we put him to? And in fact, the rodef does not necessarily have to die. The Gemara says if you can prevent him from killing someone without killing him, shoot for the legs, as we would say, then that's what you have to do. Why is this quasi-rodef that Ben Tzora Mor is anticipated to be a rodef? Why is he put to death with skila? And on that says the Yad Ramah, Mishum Sofo L'Tzoach, he's a rodef. However, so Ata, but again, all right, we'll kill him now as a potential rodef. When why do we choose to put him to death with skila and not sayif like a rotzeach? If you're judging him as a rodef, says the Yad Ramah, once we're already considering him a qualified capital case where we should condemn him to death, albeit under the law of rodef, then we should already consider al shem sofo that he'll be machal Shabbos. Again, he's oblivious to the question that we asked before about 1 out of 7. He's assuming that he will be machal Shabbos by killing someone on Shabbos. We're going to be putting him to death with that particular method called skila, because once he's nidan al shem sofo as a rodef, and now we have to put him to death as a rodef because we want to spare and save innocent victims from this Ben Tzora Mor, then we will implement that punishment which is appropriate for a machal Shabbos, because we're going to assume al shem sofo that not only is he a rodef to kill someone, he'll kill someone on Shabbos. But again, we can only justify skila once we've already classified him as a rodef. Once we've already concluded that he deserves to die, anticipating that he will be a rodef, now we can talk about what will he eventually do. And in the process of murder, for the sake of his eviction, he'll even murder someone on Shabbos, and as a machal Shabbos, he's chayav skila. That's the very complex thesis of the Yad Ramah. And now we turn to page 2, base. Oh, I see it's late. Good. So this is a great place to stop. It's a natural break. So we're up to page base. And in the Gemara itself, we're up to the Gemara itself, Katan Minol Depot. In the Gemara. So tomorrow, B'li Neder, we'll start with Katan Minol Depot, and then we'll go back to the Marocha Lemon Test to page 8. So I wish you a great day. And please give me some feedback about this coming Tuesday, which is election day. Because I have to go from Efrat to Har Nof, because that's where they recognize my residence. So on Tuesday, to fulfill my, what's the word, my, how do you say citizenry duty? But there's another word I'm looking for.
Obligation.
No, not obligation, but what's the word before obligation? My
Responsibility.
No, a word before responsibility. My
You just want to say civic.
civic responsibility.
Yeah.
That was what I was looking for. In order to fulfill my civic responsibility, and I'm as confused as everybody else is, I don't know if there are any good candidates, but anyway, that's a cynical comment. But be that as it may, I have to hop over to Har Nof, and I like to do these things in the morning.
So let's not meet Tuesday.
Okay, so we already concluded that we'll have the 9:30 class on Tuesday. And then I
Okay.
think at the conclusion of the 9:30 class, I'll head out to Harno. I'll
Okay.
think it over and talk to my wife, but get back to you. But right now, that's the plan
Okay.
because of election. Can't blame it on me. Okay, then. So have a
Okay.
good day, and we'll see each other tomorrow.